Arlington Heights, and that was Robert E. Lee's plantation. They deforested the land, they built cabins and set up tents to prevent a Confederate attack on the area, which meant they would attack Washington, D.C. In June 1864, Secretary of War Stanton approved Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs' request to utilize 200 acres of the land for a new graveyard. Soldiers had begun sewing names on their jackets before they went into the battle, with the hopes that if they were killed, they could be returned to their loved ones. If they were killed. However, it was often futile. After the war, the Quartermaster General of the Army embarked on the task of identifying as many soldiers as possible, or matching them to their regiments and returning them home. In 1865, Army troops collected the bodies of 2,111 Army and Confederate dead from the battlefields of First and Second Bull Run and the retreat along the Rappahannock River. They were reinterred below the that became the early portion of Arlington National Cemetery. They further dug a 20-foot by 20-foot pit that was lined and segmented into compartments. Some soldiers, they found, could not properly be laid to rest. Pause this for a second and start back up. They were found as partial human beings, skulls, legs, arms, and ribs. As gruesome as it sounds, it was a means of providing a burial spot for those who gave their lives. Once filled, a sarcophagus was raised to honor the 2,000 plus nameless soldiers. General Meigs went on to do much work on the design of Arlington National Cemetery, and so a short story of how the great and beautiful Arlington National Cemetery was begun. And that was this picture here of that was the picture that I was trying to show. That sits over that pit of these individuals. Sorry, Terry and I were playing with this. Centennial Remembrance of 2019-2021. The sad tale of the unknown soldier began with a great deal of publicity after World War I. In Great Britain, a British chaplain serving in the front lines in 1916 noticed a grave in a garden marked with a rough cross, marked in pencil, the words, "An unknown British soldier." After the war in 1920, he wrote to the Dean of Westminster, suggesting that a soldier who was killed during the Great War be returned to London to be memorialized in the Abbey. Remains that have been exhumed ever stop this. remains that had been exhumed from 4 different major battle areas, the Ain, the Somme, the Era, and the Ypres, were brought to the chapel at St. Paul de Leon, and excuse my French, on the night of 7 November 1920. Brigadier General Louis Wyatt, General Officer in charge of troops in France, in Flanders, and the British Army Chaplain and Colonel Edward Gell, entered the chapel alone, where the 4 bodies lay on stretchers covered by Union flags. Brigadier General Wyatt selected one of the bodies, and he and the chaplain placed it in a plain coffin and sealed it. The remaining 3 bodies were reinterred. However, there were a lot of stories about where they were reinterred. Many, many stories. Chaplains from the Church of England, the Roman Catholic Church, and nonconformist churches held a service in the chapel before the body was escorted to Boulogne to rest overnight. On 8 November, the coffin was placed inside another coffin that had been sent from England, made of 2-inch thick oak grown from a tree in the Hampton Court Palace. And if anyone watched the memorial services for Queen Elizabeth, you know where Hampton Court is. Within the iron bands of the coffin were placed a 16th century Crusader's sword from the Tower of London. It was then covered with the flag Chaplain Railton had used as an altar cloth during the war, known as Padre's flag. And he was the one who recommended that an unknown soldier be buried at the Abbey. The coffin plate bore the inscription, "A British warrior who fell in the Great War 1914 to 1918 for king and country." The destroyer Verdun transported the coffin to Dover, and it was taken by train to Victoria Station in London. On the morning of 11 November, the coffin was placed on a gun carriage drawn by 6 black horses of the Royal Horse Artillery to begin the final journey where King George V and members of the royal family and ministers of state followed the coffin to Westminster Abbey. Once at Westminster Abbey, the coffin was borne through a congregation. If you've ever been at Westminster Abbey, this is a lousy picture of the Abbey, but that's the coffin with Padre's flag. A congregation of around 1,000 mourners received a special invitation to attend. And guard of honor of 100 holders of the Victoria Cross from all 3 services. After the service, including hymns and revelry, the grave was filled with 100 sandbags of French soil. And it was filled in from the battlefields of France. First by a spoonful by the king. Not by a shovel by the king, but it was a spoonful from the king. General Pershing, on behalf of the United States, conferred the Congressional Medal of Honor on the unknown warrior. In the United States, on March 21, the U.S. Congress authorized burial of an unknown soldier to take place in the Memorial Amphitheater of Arlington National Cemetery later that year. The ceremony would ultimately be held in conjunction with what was known at the time as Armistice Day, our current Veterans Day. I might note that some of the pictures, again, are not available on the 24 October 1921, the French town of Chalon-sur-Marne became the center of the selection ceremony for the American unknown soldier. 4 bodies were transported to the Chalon Hotel de Ville from the cemeteries of Ain-Marne, Somme, Meuse-Argonne, and Saint-Mihiel. All were either known as Great Battleground of World War I, or where the American troops took a leading role in the battles. There was no indication from the interment of these soldiers as to name, rank, organization, or date of death. Before I talk about this actual selection, allow me to tell you about the American soldier who was chosen to select the American unknown. We can proudly say that he was from Illinois. He was from Chicago, born in Chicago in 1898, enlisting in the Army in early 1917. He was wounded in action at least 3 times, honorably discharged, and subsequently re-enlisted the following day. He was originally selected as one of 6 pallbearers, but after Major General Rogers, the Army Quartermaster General, learned that the French had delegated the honor to an enlisted man, Rogers decided to do the same. Younger later recalled he was told, "I guess you're the one, Younger, you select the unknown." In a syndicated article 15 years later, he remembered feeling overwhelmed as he made the selection. I think it is easier to relay the story in his own words. I took the flowers, advanced to the little temporary shrine through a line of French soldiers. I entered the door and stood alone with the dead. For a moment I hesitated and said a prayer, inaudible, inarticulate, but real. Then I looked around. That scene will remain with me forever. Each casket was draped with a beautiful American flag. I began a slow march around the caskets. Which should it be? Thoughts poured like torrents through my mind. Maybe these buddies had once been my pals. Perhaps one of them had fought with me, had befriended me, had possibly shielded me from a bullet that might have put me in his place. Who would even know? I was numb. I couldn't choose. 3 times I walked around the caskets, then something drew me to the coffin, second to my right on entering. I couldn't walk another step. It seemed as if God raised my hand and guided me as I placed the roses on the casket. This then was to be America's unknown soldier. And by that simple act, I had started him on his road to destiny. I tarried a moment, then remembered my task was done. I saluted the casket and reported the order had been fulfilled. And if I can pause for a moment, everything written about Wyatt and Younger was that neither man chose to discuss the honor placed on them later, because it would have lessened the honor of the unknown warriors or unknown soldiers. They didn't want to take that honor away from them. The chosen casket bore the inscription, "An unknown warrior who gave his life in the World War." It traveled by train to Paris and then to Le Havre, where it would be boarded onto the cruiser Olympia for the voyage to the United States. Upon reaching American shores, the Olympia cruised up the Potomac River to the Naval Yard. This may be a new picture of the Olympia, but to the Naval Yard. casket was carried ashore in a fashion befitting a full admiral. And then placed on a caisson for the trip to the capital. Once inside the capital, the casket would be placed on the Lincoln catafalque, the one used for Lincoln's body to be displayed, inside the rotunda with the foot of the casket to the west, where 4 honor guards were already present. President and Mrs. Harding entered the rotunda with Mrs. Harding placing a wide white band of ribbon, which she had made herself, on the casket, and President Harding then stepped forward and pinned a silver national shield with 48 gold stars. The public, and then a wreath of crimson roses. The public was allowed to enter the rotunda to pay their respects on 10 November, with likely more than 90,000 people attending. The official procession went on foot from the Capitol to the White House, where some dignitaries changed to cars. Unfortunately, President Harding had a little oops. His car got caught in a traffic jam on the way to Arlington National Cemetery, and they cut across the field in order to get there in time for the burial ceremony. The body of the unknown soldier was taken to the apse, which is here, in the Memorial Amphitheater, where a bugler sounded attention 3 times. Everyone observed a 2-minute period of silence. The program included music, speeches, and decorations of honor, including the Medal of Honor and Distinguished Service Cross. Stop this for a second. The casket was lowered into the crypt, the bottom of which was covered with a layer of soil from France, just as it had been the one in England. Tributes included one by Chief Plentycoup, chief of the Coronation, representing all Americans who fought, American Indians who fought in the World War. He laid his war bonnet and his coot stick at the tomb. The war bonnet has been preserved in the museum at Arlington. By 1937, guards were added to honor the sanctity of the tomb. The Tomb of the Unknown became one of the most revered places in America. At the time of World War I, the belief was that it was the war to end all wars, but it wasn't. We fought through World War II and the Korean conflict in the 1940s and early 1950s. Many more lives were lost, and individuals were not able to be identified. President Eisenhower signed legislation in 1956 to expand the tomb to include servicemen from World War II and Korea. Due to the global scale of World War II, the selection process was much more elaborate. 18 unidentified soldiers were originally exhumed from the North African and European theaters. From the North African and European theaters, as well as from various cemeteries in the Pacific Rim. After being rearranged to prevent identification by location, back to this one. Hospital Corpsman First Class William Charette, Medal of Honor recipient from Korea, made the 2 selections of aboard the USS Canberra off the coast of Virginia on 26 May 1958. Several days later, the caskets arrived in Washington to lay in state in the Capitol. On May 30, Memorial Day, a ceremonial procession brought the unknowns to Arlington. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm skipping around here. There's the bodies of the World War II and Korean unknown soldiers laying in state in the rotunda. And then they were brought to Arlington National Cemetery on 30 May, which was Memorial Day, for a service. And the press remarked that during the service, Eisenhower's face represented the larger story that World War II experience that he had as a general. It was hard for him. He wasn't just president, he was also a general. He bestowed Medal of Honor on the unknown soldiers, and there was not a picture available. You could see it, but it could not be saved. In 1984, a Vietnam War unknown was added to the site. Due to advances in identification of soldiers' remains, the Department of Defense was able to determine that the remains placed in the tomb in 1984 were those of Air Force. I cut my slides short to shorten this, and I shouldn't have done that. Were Air Force First Lieutenant Michael Blassie, who was shot down in Vietnam. And by DNA, they were able to identify him, and he was exhumed and reinterred at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in Missouri in 1998. His crypt remains open or available to for those to signify those who were still missing. There are so many missing soldiers from Vietnam and from other wars. And so that crypt is still there and is meant to signify those who are missing. And I think that is a thing that the government did well. Sometimes they don't do things well, but I think that was a thing that they did well. And that's a picture of the memorial, unknown soldier memorial, in front of the crypts. Okay, now we can go on to sesquicentennial celebration. Or it's not it's the centennial celebration, making myself too old. The centennial celebration in Great Britain was planned for Armistice Day on 2018, 100 years after the signing of the armistice with Germany, the 11th hour, on the 11th day, the 11th month of 1918. In retrospect, the planning of the celebration was well-timed because of COVID. Probably the most poignant and reflective of the lives lost during the war was that placed at the Tower of London. As I indicated earlier, the poppy was a sign during World War I of the renewal of life. They grew up between the headstones and the little everywhere on the fields, on the battlefields. they were the first flowers to grow and a sign of color, so they began selling ceramic poppies. The artist who started the poppy project found, while researching World War I, that there had been 888,246 British and colonial military fatalities. They began to seek a way to represent that and to represent each lost warrior. After a lot of grassroots efforts to obtain a large, historically significant site to display nearly 1 million flowers, they finally given permission to use the Tower of London. It took 300 volunteers, 300 volunteers at 3 sites. This is going to make us so in trouble. 3 sites a year to make that many flowers. Each poppy was rolled, cut, and shaped by hand. By the time they were stacked to dry on piles of boards, the studios looked like the trenches. Remember, everyone was fighting out of trenches in World War I. And they looked like they'd been placed in the trenches of the war. The poppies were straight red and counted. Then they were sent to the tower. And the beef eaters, I don't know whether you know who the beef eaters are, they're the guards at the Tower of London. The beef eaters in their fancy schmancy guard uniforms counted 888,246 poppies all over again to make sure they had the right number. Every lost warrior had to be represented. Placement of the poppies started in August 2018. Now that's 3 months before they needed them. And many of them were veterans that were doing that, placing them in the moat. And you can see where they are down here. But they decided, the designer decided, the poppies wouldn't be visible to anyone until they got up on the moat, and it really, or if they were flying overhead. Tom Piper, the designer, decided that they needed a way for them to be visible. So they began a cascade to find a way to do a cascade of poppies. And they used what was called the weeping window, which is here. Can you see it? The weeping window at the tower. And that made it much more visible. One of the other things they did is family members put their pictures of their loved ones who were lost along the fence at the tower. And then another thing that happened was Queen Elizabeth was still able to walk among the poppies at the moat during the centennial celebration in 2018. And it's the most poignant thing to see her walking among those poppies. On 11 November 2018, I could not save those. Her Majesty the Queen and His Excellency Frank Walter Steinmeier, the President of Germany, attended a service at Westminster Abbey to mark the end of centennial, the end of the war. Could not download those pictures. They're available online, but you couldn't download them. In the United States, we ran into COVID problems in trying to have some kind of a nice program. These are pictures of the guards standing at attention during the program in front of the monument. And the thing they did was to honor all soldiers that were lost. Another thing that was allowed was they were allowed to pay tribute by placing a floral tribute at the grave of the unknown soldier, and that has never been allowed to be done. At the beginning of the program, this is the start of the aerial flyover. I was surprised that that was allowed, given that they were military planes. I don't know. I could download that, but not other things. And then the Old Guard parade, people could line up along the walkway. I don't see anybody lined up along the walkway, but the Old Guard parade, they had individuals from each unit of the military in their old uniforms form a parade to the apse for the service. Then during the program, Vincent goes ahead of the coronation, perform a smudge pot during the opening ceremony, and it's a burning of planted herbs and resins in a clay or shell bowl while prayers are being done. Like I said, so few pictures were available from that ceremony. It's just really unfortunate. While there's much information that could be shared visually or verbally on the unknown soldiers' stories, they've received many accolades through the years. I hope that as we observe Veterans Day, we will remember all those who have served, not just our unknown soldiers or our unknown warriors, but all those who have served. I had a father who served, a stepfather who served many years. My father-in-law served, many who served. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I hope that we will remember all those who have served. In addition, as General Colin Powell said, leadership is all about people. It is not about organizations. It is not about plans. It's not about strategies. It is all about people. Motivating people to get the job done. They may not have all served on the battlefield or lost their lives, but we're a team. We're a team throughout multiple wars. Lest we forget service by all.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
I tried to cut